Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Maxine Leo, struggling with her mother's medical bills, finds herself forced into an unexpected marriage with Gary Blake, the powerful heir to the Blake Empire. What starts as a desperate arrangement for survival quickly turns into a battle for love, power, and legacy. As Maxine and Gary navigate family betrayals, hidden secrets, and their growing connection, they discover that together, they can rewrite their destinies. This is a story of survival, strength, and the unexpected love that emerges from the wreckage of their pasts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest stories. Before we dive into this intense tale of love, betrayal, and destiny, we ask you to support us by liking and subscribing to our channel so you never miss another heart-stirring story. Your support truly means everything to us. The unrelenting downpour in Chicago battered the penthouse's towering windows. Each drop seemed like a harsh reminder of the chill that had crept into Maxine Leo's life. She curled tighter into the worn-out sofa, hugging herself, trying to fight off the cold that was not caused by the storm outside, but the suffocating sadness inside her. The old-fashioned landline phone rang from across the room, piercing the silence that had engulfed her. It had been ringing all morning. Each shrill sound felt like a reminder of the insurmountable debt choking her. She knew who it was. The hospital. Another demand, another threat regarding her mother's mounting medical bills. Tears blurred her sight as she picked up the receiver, her hand trembling. "Hello, Monsieur Leo." The voice on the other end was cold, detached. "We regret to inform you, but if the outstanding balance on your mother's care is not paid by Friday, we will be forced to transfer her to a state-funded facility with fewer resources." Maxine's heart sank. A state-funded facility meant no chance of survival. "Please," she pleaded, her voice faltering. "Just a little more time. I'll find the money. My mother needs the best care." But the voice on the other end was unyielding. With a sinking stomach, she hung up. There was no more time. Her meager earnings from the downtown coffee shop barely covered her rent, let alone the six-figure medical debt. Frantic, her mind raced through every possibility, but she had nothing left, except one option, the one door she had promised herself she'd never open again. Minutes later, she stood drenched on the slick sidewalk, the cold rain mixing with her hot tears. Her heart raced. She had no choice. Her mother needed her. Taking a shaky breath, Maxine found herself standing in front of the imposing limestone mansion in Lincoln Park. The towering white columns and pristine gardens were a sharp contrast to her own modest life. Her hand hovered over the ornate brass bell. She knew she wasn't welcome here, but there was no other choice. The heavy oak door opened to reveal Catherine, her stepmother, impeccably dressed in a silk gown with perfectly styled blonde hair. Her gaze was filled with disdain. "Well, well, look who's here," Catherine sneered, folding her arms. "Did you get lost on your way out of the gutter?" Maxine fought back the sting of humiliation, standing tall, despite the sting of the words. "I need to speak to my father," she said. Catherine sighed, her boredom evident, but stepped aside. The grandeur of the house assaulted her senses. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the soaring ceiling, and the air smelled of expensive flowers and polished wood. It was the complete opposite of her small, worn apartment. Arthur Leo, her father, sat in the lavish living room, buried in the Wall Street Journal. He looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Maxine, what's wrong?" Maxine's fists clenched. "Dad, I need a loan," she began. But Catherine, lounging on a velvet chair, let out a derisive laugh. "Oh, of course. You always want money." Ignoring her, Maxine continued. "I need $100,000. The hospital will transfer Mom if I don't pay." Arthur's face tightened with concern. But before he could speak, Catherine interrupted. "Arthur, that's absurd. You can't just hand out that kind of money." Maxine's stomach tightened. "Please, Dad." Her father's eyes shifted between Maxine and Catherine. He wanted to help, but the power in this house lay with Catherine. Just as he seemed ready to respond, the sound of heels echoed down the grand staircase. "What's the bastard stepsister doing here?" Olivia's voice, sharp and cruel, filled the room as she appeared at the top of the stairs with a smug smile. Olivia's perfectly styled blonde hair bounced as she descended, her words always laced with venom. "Money? You've never had the guts to ask for it before." Maxine's cheeks flushed with anger. "I'm not begging. It's a loan, and I'll pay it back." Olivia exchanged a smug glance with Catherine. "Well, I might have a solution for you," Olivia said, her smile turning predatory. "You know the Blake family, right? The real estate tycoons?" Maxine nodded. "Everyone in Chicago does." Olivia's smile widened. I'm engaged to one of them. But there's a catch. My fiancé Gary Blake is a failure. He's the black sheep of the family. He's broke, rebellious, and involved in shady business. A chill ran down Maxine's spine. What does this have to do with me? You and Gary, Olivia purred, are both outsiders. You'd make the perfect match, Maxine froze. What? Catherine stepped forward with a venomous smile. If you marry him in Olivia's place, we'll ensure that Arthur gives you the $100,000. Maxine's heart sank. Why would I marry a man I don't even know? Olivia rolled her eyes. It's your only option. You want the money or not? Maxine's mind screamed to refuse, to run away. But the thought of her mother in the hospital kept her rooted. She closed her eyes and whispered, If I marry him, you'll give me the money? Catherine and Olivia exchanged triumphant looks and nodded. Maxine knew what she had to do. It was a monstrous choice, but she had no choice. It's a difficult time. Difficult? She cried, her voice raw with betrayal. My mother is dying, and you're talking about a difficult time. You looked me in the eye and agreed to this. Catherine glided to her husband's side, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm in a gesture of ownership. Arthur, darling, we've discussed this. It's for the best. We can't enable this dependency. Maxine saw it then, the exact moment her father's resolve crumbled. The flicker of fear in his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders as he capitulated to his wife's will. He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. I'll see what I can do, Maxine. Maybe in a few weeks. It was a final devastating blow, a punch to the gut that left her breathless. She had known he was weak, but she had clung to a desperate hope that his love for her mother, would finally make him amen of his word. She looked at the three of them, Catherine, Olivia, and her father. A perfect monstrous tableau of cruelty, vanity, and cowardice. The tears she had been fighting threatened to spill over, but she refused to give them the satisfaction. You don't have to, she said, her voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. It was the chilling calm that comes after the storm has passed, leaving only wreckage behind. I see now. I see everything. She turned and walked out of the mansion without a backward glance, her back straight, her head held high. Once she was on the street, hidden from their view by the high stone walls, she finally allowed a single hot tear to trace a path down her cheek. She had sold herself for a lie. What would you have done in Maxine's position? Would you have given up, or would you have fought back in a different way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic, desperate activity. She went back to her old cramped apartment, there thick with the smell of loneliness and coffee grounds. She packed up the last of her belongings, her clothes, a few cherished books, small trinkets that held the only memories of a happier time. She needed money, and she needed it now. She took photos of her small television, her microwave, her laptop, and posted them on an online marketplace, listing them for prices far below their worth. Every dollar counted. A buyer contacted her almost immediately, interested in her laptop. He seemed eager, almost too eager, and insisted on meeting in a public place to make the exchange. Desperate, Maxine agreed. They met in the bustling parking lot of a supermarket. He handed her a cashier's check and she foolishly trusting handed over the laptop. It wasn't until she was at the bank, the teller looking at her with pity, that she discovered the truth. The check was a sophisticated forgery, worthless. The buyer's number was disconnected. He was a ghost. Maxine stumbled out of the bank, the reality of her situation finally crushing her. Betrayed by her family, robbed by a stranger, she sank onto a nearby park bench, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar in her ears. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. She had hit rock bottom, she had nothing left. Across the city, in a sleek, minimalist office overlooking the Chicago River, Gary Blake sat across from his most trusted associate, a sharp, discreet man named Marcus. So, you went through with it, Marcus said, a rare note of disapproval in his voice. I still don't understand the endgame, Gary. Marrying some unknown girl to spook your uncle. It's a risky play. Gary leaned back in his chair, a look of cold calculation in his eyes. My uncle thinks I'm a broken, bankrupt liability. He's been trying to leverage my instability to force a buyout of my shares in the company. This marriage, this sudden picture of domesticity, it throws him off balance. It makes him wonder what I know, what I'm planning, and the girl. Maxine, Marcus asked. What about her? Gary paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes as he thought of her. She's not what I expected. And her family, he said, his voice hardening, is nest off vipers. Keep digging into Arthur Hayes' finances. I want to know everything. Later that evening, driving home through the city, Gary's mind was a whirlwind of strategy and calculation. But as he turned onto his quiet street, a figure huddled on a bench under a streetlight caught his eye. The posture of utter defeat was unmistakable. It was Maxine. He pulled over, his heart giving an unexpected lurch. He got out and approached her quietly. "Maxine?" She looked up, startled, her face pale and stained with tears. She hastily wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Gary, what are you doing here?" "I live here, remember?" he said gently. "What happened?" "Nothing." She lied, forcing a brittle smile. "I was just getting some air." He didn't believe her for a second. He could see the raw despair in her eyes. He sat down beside her, not too close, but near enough to offer a silent presence. "You can talk to me, you know. We're in this together for now." The kindness in his voice, so unexpected, was her undoing. The story tumbled out of her. The betrayal at the mansion, her father's weakness, the cruel trick her stepmother and stepsister had played, and then the final humiliation of being scammed out of her last valuable possession. Gary listened in absolute silence, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with the focused intensity of a man planning a war. When she finished, her voice a hoarse whisper, he stood up and held out his hand. "Come on," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Let's go home." Back in the warmth of the brownstone, he made her a cup of tea. As she sat huddled on the sofa, he stood by the window, his back to her, and made a phone call. His voice was low, but each word was a command, sharp and precise. "Marcus, change of plans. I want everything you have on Arthur Leo and his wife Catherine, and I want it on my desk in 1 hour. And get me the name of the hospital where Maxine's mother is a patient." He hung up and turned to face her. "Your family made a mistake," he said, his green eyes blazing with a dangerous light. "They picked a fight with the wrong person." Maxine stared at him, bewildered. "What are you going to do?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it held no warmth. "They used you to get to my family. Now I'm going to use them to get what I want. And in the process," he said, his gaze softening as he looked at her, "we're going to make sure your mother gets the care she needs." He walked over to his briefcase and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled for a moment, tore out the check, and handed it to her. Maxine looked down. It was made out to the hospital for the full amount. 100,000. "I can't take this," she stammered, Herman reeling. "This wasn't part of our deal." "Our deal just changed," Gary said, his voice quiet but absolute. "You're my wife, Maxine. Your problems are now my problems, and I always take care of my problems." She stared at the check, then up at him, the powerful, enigmatic man who had just become her unlikely savior. She had married a stranger to save her mother, only to be betrayed. And now that same stranger was offering her the salvation she so desperately needed. She'd no idea what his game was or what he would expect in return. But as she looked into his intense green eyes, she knew one thing for certain. Her life had just become infinitely more complicated and terrifyingly, exhilaratingly intertwined with his. Part 3, The Price of Salvation. The check felt impossibly heavy in Maxine's hands. It was just a slip of paper, but it represented the weight of her desperation, the price of her freedom, and the terrifying unknown cost of her salvation. She had stared at it for most of the night, the elegant script of Gary's signature, a stark contrast to the chaotic turmoil in her heart. $100,000, a sum that was to her a mountain, and to him seemingly a pebble. When morning came, she found him in the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp shirt and trousers, reading a financial report on a tablet as he drank his coffee. The domestic scene was so jarringly normal it felt surreal. The man who had slept on the sofa looked every inch the powerful tycoon her stepsister had accidentally married her to. He looked up as she entered, his green eyes sharp and assessing. "Did you sleep?" "Not really," she admitted, clutching the check in her hand. "Gary, about this, I have to pay you back. I'll get a second job. I'll work for the rest of my life if I have to, but I will pay you back." He took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. "Consider it an advance on your services as Mrs. Blake. You fulfilled your end of the bargain by showing up at the altar. I'm fulfilling mine. But this is too much," she insisted. "This wasn't the deal." "The deal," he said, setting his tablet aside and giving her his full attention, "is whatever I say it is. Your only job today is to go to that hospital, pay that bill, and tell your mother that she never has to worry about it again. A car will be waiting for you downstairs in 30 minutes. His tone was not unkind, but it was absolute. It was the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. Maxine found herself nodding, unable to argue. For the first time, she was beginning to understand the sheer scale of the power he wielded so casually. The drive to the hospital was a silent, nerve-wracking journey in the back of a black luxury sedan that moved through Chicago traffic like a shark through water. Maxine clutched her purse, the check inside feeling like a burning secret. Walking into the hospital's billing department, the same place where she had begged and pleaded for extensions just days before, felt like stepping into another life. The same clerk sat behind the glass, her expression bored and dismissive. "I'm here to settle the account for Helen Leo," Maxine said, her voice steadier than she expected. The clerk barely looked up. "The full balance is due by Friday, as you were previously informed, Miss Leo." Without a word, Maxine slid the check under the glass. The clerk picked it up, her eyes glancing at the amount. She stopped, her eyes widened, and she looked at the signature, then back at the amount, and finally up at Maxine, her expression a mixture of shock and newfound respect. "One moment," the clerk stammered, disappearing into a back office. Maxine waited, her heart pounding. A few minutes later, the clerk returned with a manager who processed the payment with an almost reverential silence. He stamped the final invoice with a heavy, satisfying thud. Paid in full. A wave of relief so profound it made her knees weak washed over Maxine. It was over. The suffocating weight that had been crushing her for months was finally, miraculously gone. She practically floated to her mother's room. She found her sleeping, looking smaller and more fragile than ever in the large hospital bed. Maxine sat beside her, gently taking her hand. Her mother's eyes fluttered open. "Maxine, darling," she whispered, her voice frail. "You look tired." "I'm okay, Mom," Maxine said, squeezing her hand, her voice thick with emotion. "And you're going to be okay, too. Everything's been taken care of. You're safe. They can't move you. But the money, honey, how?" Maxine hesitated. How could she explain the chaotic truth that she was married to a mysterious billionaire as part of some corporate power play? The truth would only frighten her. So she told a lie, a leaburn of love and a desperate need to protect. "Dad came through," she said softly. "He finally did the right thing." A single tear of relief rolled down her mother's cheek. "Oh, Maxine, I knew he still had some good in him." Was Maxine right to lie to her mother to shield her from the complicated truth? Or does a relationship built on even a white lie start on shaky ground? Tell us your opinion below. Leaving the hospital, Maxine felt like she could breathe again for the first time in years. But as the car whisked her back toward Gary's brownstone, the euphoria of relief was slowly replaced by the sobering reality of her situation. She had been saved, but she was not free. She was now indebted to Gary in a way that was far more binding than any marriage certificate. She found him in a room she hadn't seen before. A library lined from floor to ceiling with books. A large mahogany desk sitting before a window that overlooked a private garden. He was on the phone, his back to her, and she caught a snippet of his conversation. "No, the acquisition is not negotiable. Make them an offer they can't refuse. I want it finalized by the end of the week." He hung up and turned, sensing her presence. "Is it done?" "Yes," she said, her voice small in the grand room. "Thank you, Gary. I don't know how I can ever." "We need to talk about that," he interrupted, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs in front of his desk. "Sit," she sat, feeling like she was in a formal business meeting. "I meant what I said, Gary," she began, finding her resolve. "I will pay you back. We can write up a formal loan agreement with interest, whatever you want." He regarded her for the long moment, a ghost of Asmile playing on his lips. "Maxine," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "the money is irrelevant. It was an investment." "An investment in what?" "In you," he said simply, "and in the success of our partnership, which brings me to our new arrangement." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the desk, his green eyes boring into hers. "The terms of our agreement have changed. I am no longer interested in a wife who is merely a name on a piece of paper. The game I'm playing is more complex than you can imagine. My uncle, my family, our competitors, they are all watching my every move." "They are watching your every move." He stood up and began to pace slowly in front of the window. "They expected me to marry a vapid socialite or remain a reclusive failure. You marrying me out of the blue has them confused. Your quiet dignity, your mysterious background. You're a wild card and that makes you valuable." "Valuable how?" she whispered, her mind racing. "I need more than a ghost, Maxine. I need a queen to play opposite me on this chessboard," he said, turning to face her. "I need you to become Mrs. Gary Blake in every sense of the word, at least in public. You will have an unlimited clothing allowance, access to my staff, my cars, my homes. You will be seen at the right charities. You will be photographed at the right events. You will be intelligent, elegant, and completely devoted to your husband." He stopped in front of her, looking down at her. "In return for this performance, your mother's ongoing medical care will be assured, and you will have a life of security you've never known. But I will demand your absolute loyalty. You will be my partner in this deception. No more secrets." Maxine stared at him, her heart hammering in her chest. This was no longer a simple 2-year arrangement where she could hide in the shadows. He was asking her to step onto the main stage, into the full glare of his dangerous world. He was offering her a gilded cage, but also a throne. "And my family?" she asked, thinking of Catherine and Olivia's inevitable fury. A cold, predatory smile touched Gary's lips. "Oh, don't worry about them," he said. "I have plans for your family. They wanted to play a game with a Blake. They are about to find out what happens when you lose." He extended his hand. "So, Maxine Leo, do we have a deal?" She looked at his outstretched hand, then into his intense, challenging eyes. The path he was offering was terrifying, uncertain, and filled with peril. But it was also a path of strength, a chance to fight back, a chance to become someone she had never imagined she could be. The woman who had left her father's house broken and defeated that morning was gone. In her place was a woman who had just been given the weapons for her own war. She took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "Yes, Gary," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We have a deal. Part 4. The Forging of a Queen." The dawn that broke over Chicago the next day felt different. For Maxine, it wasn't the dawn of another day of struggle, but the first day of a new tenure, terrifying and electrifying life. Shay woke not to the suffocating anxiety of death, but to the heavy reality of the deal she had made. She was no longer just a victim. She was a chess piece, a willing participant in a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. Gary was already gone when she emerged from her room, but a small handwritten note sat on the kitchen counter next to a freshly brewed pot of coffee. "Maxine, today your new life begins. A car will be here for you at 10 a.m. Her name is Evelyn. Trust her. She will prepare you for what's to come." The note was sparse, devoid of emotion, yet it carried an undeniable undercurrent of command. Punctually at 10, a black sedan arrived. The woman who stepped out was the epitome of chic professionalism. Tall, rail-thin, with a severe black bob-and-piercing gray eyes, Evelyn sized Maxine up with an expression that was neither friendly nor unkind. It was the look of an expert evaluating raw material. "Maxine Blake," Evelyn stated. "Not a question but a confirmation. I'm Evelyn Croft. Gary has tasked me with your integration. Shall we begin? Shall we?" What followed was not the fun movie-style shopping spree Maxine might have imagined. It was a rigorous strategic overhaul of her entire existence. Their first stop was a private appointment-only atelier in a discreet Gold Coast building. Racks of exquisite clothing lined the walls, but Evelyn dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "Anyone with a credit card can buy fashion," Evelyn explained, her voice as crisp as a new banknote. "We are not building a wardrobe. We are building an identity. The women in Gary's world don't follow trends. They embody a timeless elegance that screams old money. It's a language, and you are about to become fluent." For hours, Maxine was poked, prodded, and pinned into a dizzying array of garments. Evelyn was a ruthless director, dissecting every detail. "No, the hem's a millimeter too short. It suggests you're trying too hard. The fabric of that blouse is beautiful, but it wrinkles. You will never appear anything less than flawless." "This dress," Evelyn said, holding up a simple, devastatingly elegant navy blue sheath dress, "is not designed to get attention. It is designed to command respect. It says you belong here, that you were born to this, and that you find the ostentatious displays of new money rather tiresome." Maxine looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger, poised, powerful, and intimidating. It felt like a costume, a beautiful lie she was about to perform. A part of her recoiled from the artifice, but another smaller part felt a thrill, a flicker of the power this new skin afforded her. But the transformation went far beyond clothes. The following days were a relentless boot camp in the art of being wealthy. Evelyn drilled her on everything. The correct way to identify a vintage Bordeaux from its aroma. The subtle differences between a Monet and a Manet. The intricate family trees and scandalous histories of Chicago's most powerful families. "You will not simply be a beautiful woman on Gary's arm," Evelyn instructed during one of their lessons in the Brownstons' library. "You will be his confidant, his intellectual equal. When they speak of business, you will understand the subtext. When they speak of art, you'll have an opinion. They will try to dismiss you as a pretty face. You will not allow it." Gary himself was a near constant yet distant presence during this time. He worked from his library, his days filled with hushed, intense phone calls and meetings with men in dark suits who came and went like shadows. But every evening he and Maxine would have dinner together. These were not romantic dates. They were debriefings. He would quiz her, testing her knowledge, sharpening her instincts. "The CEO of Sterling Corp will be at the gallery opening on Thursday," he'd say. "His wife collects pre-Columbian pottery. What will you say to her? I'll ask her if she's followed the recent controversial auctions in Peru and mention the piece I almost acquired for a client." Maxine would reply, reciting the information Evelyn had provided. A flicker of approval would cross his face. "Good. Show knowledge but no arrogance. Make her feel like an equal, not a competitor. During these sessions, the lines of their arrangement began to blur. They were no longer just a fake husband and wife. They were co-conspirators, allies in a silent war. Maxine found herself admiring his sharp intellect, his strategic mind, and the flashes of a dry wit that occasionally broke through his guarded exterior. He, in turn, seemed impressed by her quick mind and her quiet, resilient strength. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, he noticed her staring at a large abstract painting on the wall. "What do you see?" he asked. "I see anger," she said without thinking, "and loneliness, but there's a small corner of hope right there. It's almost hidden." He was silent for a long moment. "No one has ever seen that before," he said, his voice quiet. "That's exactly what the artist told me when I bought it." Their eyes met across the table, and in that shared moment of understanding, a different kind of electricity sparked between them. It was a connection that had nothing to do with their contract or their performance. It was real. Maxine is being molded to fit into a world of incredible wealth and power. Do you think this world will ultimately change her for the better? Or will she risk losing the authenticity that Gary admires so much? Share your predictions in the comments. The first test came a week later. It was a private viewing at a prestigious art gallery. "This is a trial run," Gary told her as she stood before him, dressed in the navy sheath dress, her hair swept into an elegant chignon. A simple but breathtaking string of pearls alone from one of his family vaults adorned her neck. "My uncle will be there. He'll be watching you trying to find a weakness. Don't give him one." He stepped closer, adjusting the pearls. His fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of her neck, a fleeting touch that sent tremor through her. "Just remember one thing," he whispered, his voice low and intense. "Don't try to be one of them. Be yourself. Your quietness is not a weakness. It's a weapon. Let them come to you. Let them try to figure you out." Walking into the gallery felt like stepping into a lion's den. The air was thick with the scent of money and perfume, and the quiet hum of conversation was a symphony of power plays and social maneuvering. Maxine could feel the eyes on her, the curious glances, the whispered questions. She took a deep breath, remembering Gary's words. She didn't try to network or force conversations. She simply moved through the gallery with a serene grace, studying the art with genuine interest. As she had been taught, she let them come to her. A woman with a famously sharp tongue approached her. "Maxine, isn't it? I must confess, no one saw you coming. Tell me, how did you and Gary meet?" It was all so sudden. Maxine met the woman's probing gaze with a calm smile. "Sometimes the most profound connections are the ones that happen when you aren't looking for them," she replied, her voice soft but firm. The answer was beautifully vague, giving nothing away, yet implying a deep romantic history. Later, she found herself standing next to a formidable-looking older man with cold, calculating eyes. She knew from her research this was Gary's uncle, Alistair Blake, the patriarch of the family and his chief rival. "Mrs. Blake," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. "An unexpected pleasure. My nephew is a man of many secrets. You appear to be his latest." Maxine didn't flinch. "I believe the word you're looking for is surprise, Alistair. And I think it's fair to say Gary and I enjoy keeping life interesting." She then turned her attention to the sculpture beside them. "This piece is exquisite, don't you think? The artist's commentary on the fragility of power is particularly poignant." She had disarmed him, turning the conversation away from herself and subtly challenging his own status. From across the room, she saw Gary watching them, a barely perceptible nod of approval on his face. Back in the car, an uncharacteristic silence filled the space. Maxine was sure she had failed, that her inexperience had been glaringly obvious. "I'm sorry if she began. "You were magnificent," Gary interrupted, turning to her in the darkness of the car. The praise coming from him felt more valuable than any diamond. "You weren't just a surprise tonight, Maxine. You were a revelation." That night, back in the brownstone, the professional distance they had carefully maintained seemed to dissolve. He poured them both a glass of expensive scotch, and they sat in the library, not as employer and employee, but as partners who had just won their first battle. "Alistair is rattled," Gary said, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "He thought you'd be an easy target, a liability he could use against me. Instead, you intrigued him, and that makes you dangerous to him." "Is that what I am to you?" she asked quietly. "A weapon?" He looked at her, his expression serious. "You're my queen, Maxine," he said, his voice low, "and a queen is the most powerful piece on the board." He reached out, his thumb gently brushing her cheek, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. The air crackled with the unspoken feelings that had been growing between them. The performance and the reality were becoming dangerously, intoxicatingly intertwined. He let his hand drop. The moment passing. He stood up and looked out at the city lights. "You're ready," he said, his voice filled with a new hard edge. "The annual Blake Foundation Charity Gala is in 2 weeks. It will be the largest gathering of our family and business associates all year. It's where you will be officially introduced to society as my wife." He turned back to face her, his eyes blazing with purpose. "It's where the war truly begins." Part 5. The Calm Before the War. The 2 weeks leading up to the Blake Foundation Charity Gala were a strange, surreal blend of intense preparation and unexpected intimacy. The brownstone transformed into what Maxine privately called their war room. Thelibrary, once a place of quiet solitude for Gary, became their strategic hub. Maps of the gala ballroom were spread across the mahogany desk, along with guest lists annotated with Gary's sharp, decisive handwriting detailing alliances, rivalries, weaknesses, and debts. It was during one of these late-night strategy sessions, surrounded by the scent of old books and fresh coffee, that Gary finally lowered his defenses and showed her the true stakes of their game. "This isn't just about control of the company," he said, his voice low as he stared at a photograph on his desk. It was of a younger, smiling man who shared Gary's intense green eyes. "It's about him, my father." He told her the story he had never told anyone else. His father, the true visionary behind the Blake Empire, had died in an Apravit plane crash 15 years ago. It was ruled an accident, a tragic case of mechanical failure. But Gary, who was just a young man then, had always been haunted by doubts. Allister was the one who inspected the plane's maintenance logs that week. Gary explained, his jaw tight. He was the one who rushed the settlement with the FAA. He took control of the company so fast, consolidating power before anyone could ask the hard questions. "He used my status as an illegitimate son, something my father never cared about, to paint me as an emotional, unstable heir, unfit to lead. The true goal of his uncle," he revealed, was to invoke a morality and stability clause in the company's founding charter. If he could prove Gary was a reckless liability, he could force a vote from the board to buy out Gary's considerable inheritance of shares for a pittance, cementing his own tyrannical reign and erasing Gary's father's legacy for good. All my past relationships, my rebellious face, Allister secretly fueled them, using private investigators to leak stories to the press. All to build his case against me, Gary confessed, a deep-seated pain in his eyes. "That's why our marriage is so crucial. A stable, powerful, and impeccably elegant union with a woman of substance like you. It doesn't just neutralize his main weapon. It makes him look like a fool for ever underestimating me." Maxine listened, her heart aching for the boy who had lost his father and had been fighting a silent war ever since. This wasn't a corporate squabble. It was a son's quest for justice. Her role in this was no longer a performance. It was a mission. Gary is using deception to fight a battle for his father's honor. Do you believe his methods are justified, or is he becoming just as manipulative as his uncle? We'd love to hear your take on this moral dilemma in the comments. As the days counted down, the strategic partnership began to feel less like a partnership and more like a marriage. The carefully maintained distance between them evaporated in small, unguarded moments. One night, Maxine found him in the library long after midnight, unable to sleep, staring at that same photo of his father. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He simply patted the leather armchair beside him. She sat, and for an hour he spoke about the man he'd lost. Not the tycoon, but the father who taught him how to sail and who read him classic novels before bed. In return, she found herself opening up about her mother, about her simple dream of one day owning a small flower shop. A dream that had felt so distant until now. Another afternoon, Evelyn was drilling Maxine on the ridiculously complex genealogy of a rival family. And so, the third cousin, Beatrice, married the Baron's second son, who was of course disinherited after the scandal with the stable boy. Evelyn droned on. Maxine, trying to keep it all straight, finally laughed. Good heavens, it sounds less like a family tree and more like a daytime soap opera. From the doorway, a sound startled them both, a deep, genuine laugh from Gary. It was the first time she had heard him laugh so freely, and the sound was so warm and unexpected, it made her own heart skip a beat. The pretense was fading, being replaced by a fragile, authentic affection. She began to notice the little things, that he only drank coffee black, that he had a slight scar above his left eyebrow, that he loosened his tie the moment he thought no one was looking. She started leaving a plate of sandwiches and a glass of water on his desk when he worked late. A simple gesture of care he had likely never experienced. He never mentioned it, but the next morning the plate would be empty and left neatly on the kitchen counter. Of course, their enemy was not idle. Allister, feeling his position threatened, made his first move. Maxine discovered it one morning while scrolling through a notorious online gossip column. The article was slick and insidious. speaking of the latest trend among Chicago's elite, the Cinderella marriage. It didn't mention her by name, but the details were unmistakable. A mysterious, penniless beauty, a whirlwind marriage to a troubled scion of a powerful dynasty, whispers of a carefully orchestrated plan to secure a fortune. It painted her as a cunning, social-climbing gold digger. The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. All her newfound confidence evaporated, replaced by the sickening, familiar feeling of being an imposter. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a girl from the gutter playing dress-up. Gary found her in the library, her face pale, staring at the screen. He read the article over her shoulder, and she saw his expression morph from confusion to a cold, lethal rage. Insignificant parasite. He hissed, not at her, but at the author of the piece. Before Maxine could even process what was happening, he was on the phone with Marcus. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Marcus, the columnist, Veronica Vance. I want to know who pays her bills. Yes, I'm sure it's a Leicester. Find the leverage point. I don't care what it is. Financial, personal, find it. The article comes down within the hour, and it will be replaced by a full retraction and an apology for unfounded speculation. And then make sure Ms. Vance finds it very, very difficult to find work in this city ever again." He hung up. The raw, protective fury radiating from him was terrifying, but it was also breathtaking. He had unleashed his power not to protect his company or himself, but to defend her honor. He came and knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Maxine, look at me. Do not let them do this to you. This is what they done. They try to make you feel small, worthless. It's the only weapon they have against people like us. People who've something they will never understand. Integrity. But what if they're right?" She whispered, the shame still clinging to her. "No," he said, his grip tightening. "They are not right. You are the most genuine person in this entire godforsaken city, and that is why we are going to win." The night before the gala, the air in the brownstone was thick with anticipation. Maxine stood in her room, staring at the gown hanging on her door. It was a masterpiece of black velvet, elegant and understated. Yet it felt like a suit of armor for a battle she wasn't sure she was ready to fight. There was a soft knock on her door. It was Gary, who was holding a flat velvet box. "I have something for you," he said, his voice softer than usual. He opened the box. Nestled inside was a stunning diamond and sapphire necklace, intricate and clearly an heirloom. It wasn't a flashy modern piece. It was imbued with history and grace. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. She was the only person Alcester ever truly feared. Not because she was loud or aggressive, but because he could never buy her, control her, or intimidate her. She had a strength that came from within. He took the necklace from the box, his fingers brushing her skin as he fastened the clasp around her neck. The cool weight of the jewels felt like a coronation. "She would have liked you, Maxine," he whispered, his face close to hers. She never bowed to him either. The gesture was so profound, so full of trust, it shattered the last of her defenses. This was no longer about a deal. This was about him seeing her, truly seeing her, and anointing her as his qual, his partner. Tears welled in her eyes. "Gary-ish," he said, his thumb gently wiping away a tear. "We don't need words tonight." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the performance fell away, leaving only a man and a woman on the precipice of something terrifying and wonderful. He leaned in, and this time the kiss was not a brief spark of electricity, but a slow, deep, and deliberate claiming. It was a kiss that sealed their alliance, a promise of the battle to come, and the start of a love story forged in the crucible of their shared war. When they finally broke apart, they stood together by the window, looking out at the glittering expanse of the city lights below. "Are you ready?" he asked. She touched the necklace at her throat, its strength seeming to flow into her. She met his gaze in the reflection of the glass, her own eyes now filled with a fire he had ignited. "I'm ready," she said. "Tomorrow." They weren't just attending a charity gala. They were going to war, Part 6. The Queen's Gambit, the night of the Blake Foundation. Charity Gala arrived cloaked in an atmosphere of electric anticipation. It was the undisputed pinnacle of the Chicago social calendar. A night where fortunes were pledged, power was consolidated, and reputations were made or irrevocably shattered. Their arrival was a masterpiece of calculated subtlety. Not in a flashy new money supercar, but in a vintage midnight blue Bentley that whispered of generational wealth and unshakable power. As the chauffeur opened the door, a hush fell over the throng of paparazzi and onlookers. Gary emerged first, the epitome of quiet confidence in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He then turned and offered his hand, and then Maxine stepped out. The black velvet gown seemed to drink the flashing lights of the cameras, making her the center of a silent storm. The Blake sapphires at her throat glittered with a coldancient forint, a stark and stunning contrast to the warmth of her skin. She wasn't smiling, nervously or seeking approval. Her expression was one of serene, almost regal calm. As she took Gary's arm, they didn't look like a scandalous new couple. They looked like a dynasty. The whispers that followed them into the grand ballroom were not of gossip, but of awe. This was not the broken bastard son and his rumored gold-digger bride. This was a power couple radiating a united strength that was both undeniable and unnerving. They moved through this glittering crowd like seasoned monarchs. Maxine, who weeks ago would have been paralyzed with fear, now navigated the treacherous social waters with effortless grace. She spoke of art with a quiet passion, of philanthropy with an informed perspective, and of business with a surprising astuteness. She was charming, intelligent, utterly untouchable. Their first planned collision was with her past. They found Catherine and Olivia holding court near the champagne fountain, their faces a mask of barely concealed shock and envy as they watched Maxine's triumphant progress. "Maxine," Catherine said, recovering first, her voice laced with its usual venom. "What a surprise. I didn't think you'd have anything appropriate to wear to an event of this caliber." Before Gary could intervene, Maxine met her stepmother's gaze with a cool, pitying smile. "Catherine," she said, her voice clear and carrying to those nearby, "it's amazing what one can afford when one isn't propping up a failing marriage. I do hope Arthur is managing to keep you in the style to which you've become accustomed." Olivia, her face red with fury, sputtered, "How dare you!" Gariah's probably paying for all of this. Maxine's gaze drifted to her stepsister, her expression one of mild curiosity. "The difference, Olivia, is that Gary considers me an investment. You were always just a liability. I'm sure you understand." She turned away before they could respond, leaving them speechless and publicly humiliated. Their own vicious words turned against them with surgical precision. The main event, however, was still to come. Alistair Blake cornered them near the silent auction, his face a thunderous mask of rage. "Gary," he growled, foregoing any pretense of social nicety, "I see you've brought your little project out for a spin. I trust she's enjoying the fantasy before she's sent back to whatever havel you found her in." Gary remained perfectly calm, a silent sentinel by Maxine's side. He knew this was her moment. Maxine turned to face the formidable patriarch, unafraid. "Alistair," she said, hurt and polite but icy, "it's a pleasure to finally meet the man who has spent so long in my father-in-law's shadow." Alistair's eyes widened in shock at her audacity. "My brother would be spinning in his grave to see the Blake legacy in the hands of a flighty boy and his ambitious bride." "On the contrary," Maxine replied smoothly, taking a deliberate step forward. "I've spent the last few weeks in the Blake archives studying Arthur's original vision for the company. It was a vision built on innovation, risk, and most importantly, integrity. It's fascinating how far the company has strayed from those principles under your stewardship. It was a direct, stunning challenge to his leadership." Alistair was left sputtering completely wrong-footed. "Gary and I," she continued, her voice resonating with power, "are very much looking forward to restoring his father's true legacy. In fact, we've had some very encouraging conversations with some of the older board members, the ones who remember what a true Blake leader looks like." She had not only challenged him, she had declared war, implying a coup was already in motion. Later in the evening, Gary took the stage for the keynote address. The room fell silent, expecting a standard sterile CPI speech and a large donation. He began by speaking of the Foundation's work, but then his tone shifted. "Legacy," he said, his voice ringing with passion, "is not about the buildings we own or the money in our accounts. It is about the vision we build and the integrity with which we build it. My father, Arthur Blake, taught me that if he then announced a new multi-million-dollar initiative funded entirely from his personal fortune, the Arthur Blake Grant for Ethical Innovation, it was a brilliant move, honoring his father while simultaneously positioning himself as the company's moral and visionary leader. Then came the checkmate. And to lead this new chapter," Gary announced, his eyes finding Maxine in the crowd, "to ensure my father's legacy of strength and honor is at the heart of everything we do going forward. I am proud to have by my side not just as my wife, but as my most trusted partner, Maxine Blake." He extended his hand, and as she walked onto the stage to a stunned then thunderous round of applause, Alistair Blake could only watch his face a mask of pure impotent fury. The war had been won without a single shot fired. It was a public execution, carried out with breathtaking elegance. Part 7. The Empire of Two. The ride home in the Bentley was a cocoon of electrified silence. The adrenaline of the battle was fading, replaced by something deeper, more profound. "You were my queen tonight, Maxine," Gary said finally, his voice filled with an emotion she had never heard before. She turned to him in the dim light of the car, her smile small but triumphant. "No, Gary," she corrected him gently. "Tonight I was the queen. He laughed. Arik Vaprik. Yes, yes you were. The unspoken feelings that had been simmering between them for weeks finally came to the surface. It was no longer a performance, no longer a contract. This was never just about a deal for me, Maxine, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. From the moment you pulled me from that wreck, something changed. I know, she whispered back in the privacy of their shared home. He pulled her into his arms. The kiss was not the desperate claiming kiss of the night before the gala. It was a kiss of equals, of partners, of two survivors who had finally found their way home. In the months that followed, the Blake empire was reshaped. Faced with an internal revolt from board members loyal to Arthur's memory and the undeniable power couple Gary and Maxine had become, Alistair Blake was forced into a graceful retirement. Gary, with Maxine by his side as a key advisor and board member, took his rightful place at the head of the company. One of his first acts was to launch a quiet but thorough internal investigation into the circumstances of his father's death. Maxine's past life was also put to rest. With Arthur finally free from Catherine's influence and filled with remorse, he cut off his ex-wife and daughter. Their social standing evaporated overnight, leaving them financially and personally ruined. Irrelevant footnotes in a story that was no longer about them. Maxine, using her own resources, moved her mother into a beautiful private care facility with a garden overlooking Lake Michigan. With the best doctors and no more stress, her mother's health improved dramatically. One crisp autumn evening, nearly a year after the gala, Gary came home to find Maxine not in the library studying business reports, but in the sunroom, sketching. In a notebook, her face glowing with a serene happiness. "What are you designing?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and kissing her neck. "My flower shop," she said, her voice filled with a simple, profound joy. "I found the perfect little spot in Old Town." He smiled against her hair. The woman he married had become a corporate queen, but she had never lost the humble gardener he had fallen in love with. "There's something else," she said, turning in his arms to face him. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Our partnership is about to have a new board member, or maybe two." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and then a look of pure, unadulterated shock and joy washed over his face. The man who was told he was a failure, a dead end, who believed he could never be a father, was speechless. Maxine was all he could manage, his voice thick with tears. "Triplets run in my family," she teased gently, her own eyes shining. He fell to his knees, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his ear to her stomach. As if he could already hear the heartbeats of the future he never thought he'd have. They had started as two broken people bound by a desperate contract. But from the wreckage of their pasts, they had built an empire not just of wealth and power, but of justice, healing, and a love so strong it had rewritten their destinies. The sterile millionaire had found his legacy, not in a name on a building, but in the arms of the humble girl who had saved his life, and in the family they were about to create together. Theirs was the ultimate victory, a life built not on what they had, but on who they became together.